Hey guys, Rexasaur here and welcome to the second special Total War Warhammer video about battlefield tactics. This time I'll be going through the Dwarves. Now remember that this is just speculation. This is just what I know from the tabletop and how I think this is going to be shown in the game when it finally comes out. Obviously when the game does come out there will be a lot of changes. This is going to be a video game, not the a carbon copy of the tabletop, so quite a few things are most likely subject to change depending on what different units are available at the time of release and the different abilities that they might have. It could be that, for example, the Dwarves, for example, if we're going to take the Dwarves for example, some of their units might not be available, or some of the things they can do in the tabletop are represented in a very different way. So let's go move on straight to the formations that the Dwarves use on the tabletop and the fact that they will most likely be used on the in the game. Although they are very generic, we have what's called the gun line and what I call the Melly Block, what most people call like the Dwarf Anvil, I guess. So the gun line is pretty basic. You have a lot of Thunderers, you have a lot of Quarrelers, you have quite a bit of cannons, and then you have like some melee infantry in the flanks, just to make sure that when the enemy gets close they can just pound on them. The enemy will have lost most of their units by this time and you'll just rush out straight away. The melee infantry in this case is most likely either going to be warriors or slayers, and we'll see later on with the legendary lords why you should probably take slayers in this formation. The next one is the Melly Block. Now the Melly Block is basically like an offensive dwarf formation, in the case that you have you still have cannons, you still have gunners and things, but you have a very lower amount of them, and you have a big block of 6 to 8 units of the heaviest infantry you can get, either Ironbreakers or Hammerers. Ironbreakers in Warhammer, the tabletop, are really strong. In the lore they are insanely strong. In the tabletop they've been nerfed slightly from the lore, and I'm sure that in Total War Warhammer they're going to be balanced, because they are insane. But basically the idea is that you have a huge block of very heavily armoured heavy infantry, heavy dwarves, and those heavy dwarves are going to be moving forward towards the enemy. Get ready for a big, a big dwarf charge, if you want to call it that. The idea of how a melee block works is that you'll have gyrocopters and your cannons taking down the enemy war machines, taking out the big enemy skirmishers, formations and things like that. Big formations that can really hamper your advance, whilst keeping their infantry kind of intact, because your melee block is basically going to just crash into the infantry. They are vastly superior than any infantry. Dwarf infantry is insane. Dwarf infantry has the best armor in the tabletop to an extent. Like, I think only the Chaos really match in the tabletop. Lore-wise, no one comes close to a dwarf, but this isn't a lore game. So yeah. So the idea of that, of the melee block, and I think it's one that I prefer. In the tabletop, most people use the gunline formation, because that's what dwarves are mostly known for, having big guns, big cannons, and just basically threatening the enemy with long range, so that they come closer, and then when they're close, then their infantry can just rush in. The difference between that and the melee block is, as I said, that the melee block is going to be rushing as fast as their little dwarves can carry them, little dwarf legs can carry them. They're not being carried by other dwarves. That would be really strange, unless you're High King Thorgrim, of course. But they're going to be rushing towards the enemy, and that means that the enemy can be focusing on these infantry that are coming towards them. Now, the way that the melee block counters this is obviously, as I've said before, by cannons and gyrocopters. Now, I'd highly recommend that you target things like wizards and heroes with your cannons, whilst your gyrocopters focus on the amazing thing that is the war machines. I was looking for the word there. On the war machines of the enemy. Gyrocopters are going to be supreme in the air, I think, especially near the early mid game. I don't know how, obviously I don't know what the technology tree is for the dwarves completely, so I don't know when they get the ability to make gyrocopters, but I'm assuming it's going to be mid game, because they're going to be quite a strong unit, especially for air dominance, whilst most of the other air based units that the other races will get, apart from the Empire, are going to be very late game, because they're going to be big like dragons and wyverns and things like that. So most likely the Dwarfs will get air superiority before any other faction. So now we're going to look at the legendary lords for the Dwarves. So firstly we have Thorgrim Grudgebearer. Now both of the Dwarf legendary lords are very passive in their abilities, and most of the abilities actually happen on the campaign map rather than the battle map, which is very different to how the Empire legendary lords are, who are very much active participants on the battlefield in terms of abilities. Thorgrim, for example, all his abilities are not active, they're all passive. Things like High King is just a increased immunity to psychology, increased charge, and attack bonus for all around him. I'm assuming that that's not an active ability, although if it is, then that's pretty good on the battlefield, and that will be good for something like the Melly Block. The rest of his abilities are all passive. They're all to do with sieging faster or holding out more, as well as the research bonus on the battlefield, on the campaign map. The Thwopper Thwopper is probably the most interesting one, and probably one that you will use in the Melly Block formation, because your gyrocopters are going to have increased armor, which means they're going to be doing things for longer, surviving longer, harassing the enemy at a more successful degree, which is great because that's exactly what you want them to do. So that's good. So Thorgrim, basically, I believe anyway, will be perfect for the Melly Block kind of army you're going to go for. He's going to be there with his troops up front, with his High King ability giving them immunity to psychology and increased charge and attack bonuses, which is great for dwarves to have as a buff. But the rest of his abilities will probably not come into effect, which is a shame, but that's Thorgrim. Obviously, once again, we'd like to note that we don't know all the abilities. It's possible that these legendary lords are going to increase abilities or have abilities that all the generic characters like the Thanes and the Engineers are going to have in the game at this point. The next is Ungrim Iron Fist. Now Ungrim, once again, doesn't have any active abilities, but Ungrim is definitely someone you want to have in a gun line, which is ironic because he's the Slayer King. But the reason why is because, as I said whilst going through the gun line formation, you want to have Slayers on your flanks or behind your line, so that when the enemy do come close, if they get close, you can send all the Slayers out to kill any of the remaining melee troops. Ungrim is great in a Slayer-centric melee army, because his Slayer King ability increases the melee attack for all Slayer units, which is already insane. Then the Dragon Slayer means that Ungrim himself gets increased attack against large units, so things like the big monsters, dragons, wyverns, Arachnarok spiders, and other stuff are going to be really like dead against Ungrim. So that's cool, basically. Then he's got a lot of other passive abilities. Things like minus instinct and alert is not really going to affect it on the battlefield, but instead on the campaign map. Things like death blow is only going to be for him, which is annoying. And then Lord of the Deeps just means that all his army have increased morale, which is great once again for a for the missile-based army that you're going to have in a gun line, because if your troops do get attacked, and Dwarf Thunderers do get attacked because the Slayers are focusing on a different aspect of the battlefield, or a different side of the battlefield, they're going to not run, basically, which is great. And basically Ungrim is going to be good for tunnel battles. I mean, all his abilities seem to direct him towards that, so that's possibly what's going to be happening for that. So those are the formations, and those are the legendary lords. So I quickly want to pass over the heroes for the dwarves. Now there's only two released ones. There's only the Thane, which is basically just a dwarf general, and the Master Engineer, which is basically just a gunner. We don't have, well, the dwarves don't have runesmiths yet. They're not announced. There's speculation that they'll be in the game on release, but we're not sure. Runesmiths are basically not really the magic wielders of the dwarves, because dwarves don't really have magic. They have it's sort of the magic dwarves possess is in runes, and those runes are kept by the runesmiths. So the runesmiths will be like the protective magic side of the dwarves, but mostly they'll probably be just buffing like warrior priests are for the Empire. They're going to be like a little circle of buff around your men, so you're probably going to want runesmiths in your Melly Block army, and your Master Engineers in your gun line, whilst your Thanes can be either, really. It doesn't really matter. I'm not really sure because we don't know much about the Lords at the moment and the heroes. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope that it's helped you sort of understand how the Dwarfs play. It's very basic in the way it is, because Dwarves don't have, because of the lack of cavalry basically, Dwarves don't really have a lot of, don't have a lot of different strategies. You either go full gun or like full offensive infantry. Of course, once again, this is just my speculation. There's a lot of things can change when we know more about the game, and when we see the game for the first time and things like that, or play around with it. There's gonna be a lot of different builds and stuff, which I will be going through when the game releases, because I do intend to play the multiplayer aspect of this quite a bit. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.